Okay. Okay. I hope I am live because YouTube told me a couple of seconds ago that the live broadcast module was not in use at this point. So I'll wait for a few seconds to make sure. Yeah, well, connection seems to be okay. I hope you hear me. Do you hear me? Hear me? Hear me? Hear me? Okay, you hear me, I suppose. Uh, I usually don't broadcast on Sundays because everybody's entitled to their Sabbath, a day of rest. But there are alarming developments in Turkey from a financial perspective, not a health perspective. Allow me to brighten my beautiful face. And I thought for those of you who watch this broadcast and do business in Turkey, certain things need to be known. In particular, the prospect of a currency shock, that is a sudden and unanticipated depreciation of the currency. Obviously, I'm not a priest or soothsayer. I'm not saying this is going to happen with 100% uncertainty, but it is a tail risk with sufficiently fat tails. So it would be unethical for me, for someone who pretends to cover Turkish events, not to talk about it. Okay, it's exactly 3 p.m. in Istanbul, and the citizens of 31 cities are locked in their homes, which I congratulate the government on. I think the entire Turkey needs to be under lockdown. According to our health minister, Mr. Fahrettin Koca, to lick this nasty coronavirus outbreak. In 2 weeks, the cases will peak, then we'll have a 2-week plateau where there will be a high but steady number of cases. And then by the end of May or beginning of June, life will return to normal. I pray to my gods, led by Odin, that he's correct and we could have some kind of normalcy in summer months, which would help accelerate the recovery of the economy. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. In addition to a health crisis, Turkey also has a currency problem. In my last broadcast, I talked about why Mr. Erdogan refuses to sign the standby deal with IMF, even though Turkey is sadly, regretfully short of foreign currency reserves. And what really compelled me to make this broadcast are three things. First, I waited until Friday New York close to see the weekend exchange rate. Dollar TL closed at 6.94, just a tick short of 6.94. Despite what Bloomberg reports to be state banks selling dollars to stabilize Turkish lira to the tune of $1 billion to $1.5 billion on Thursday. Several contacts I have tell me that these stealth or underhanded interventions continued on Friday, but I can't confirm that because I really have no connection to the trading desks whatsoever. So imagine a currency which, despite massive interventions, continues to fall against the dollar. To give you a perspective, year to date, Turkish lira lost roughly 17% against the dollar. It's not the worst case. South African rand, I believe, leads the currencies losing value against the dollar, and Brazilian rand is right up there. But to the best of my knowledge, the central banks of these countries do not intervene in the currency market, or if they do so, they do so officially. So this sudden rise in the dollar against Turkish currency constitutes several risks, as I mentioned in my previous videos. One is that it will stoke inflation. Turkey has a chronic current account deficit, which means we import more than we export. And despite the fall in oil prices, at some point, the TL prices of imported items will have to rise, and the increase in costs will have to be reflected to final prices, even though demand is very low. So right now, Turkey is experiencing a supply shock. That is, production is down because factories are closed. On top of that, we are going to have a demand shock. I'm sorry, we're experiencing a demand shock. Sorry, Sunday. We're experiencing mostly a demand shock because most factories are open, but there are no buyers. But once factories start producing once again, I'm sorry, you can't delete the live broadcast. Right now, there is no demand. But when there is demand, when life returns to normal by June, I hope, the factories will not be able to produce because their inputs have increased in cost and they will have to sell everything much more expensively. And two, of course, Turkish corporates have a lot of dollar and euro debt. Their debt service problems will increase. But there are other problems there. Two more issues, as I've said. Also on Friday, Central Bank of Turkey said that it's doubling its asset purchase program to 10% of its balance sheet from 5%, which means it's going to print more money, to speak colloquially. And on Saturday, Turkish banking regulator, BRSA or BDDK in Turkish, has ordered banks to loan more. This is called asset adequacy ratio. It's a very technical issue, but essentially, BRSA regulates how banks can place their assets. And if you don't make loans or buy Turkish government bonds, you get penalized by the BRSA. And these penalties are not small. They start from 500,000 liras or roughly $80,000 for each percentage you fall short of the targets described in a strange formula by BRSA. Let's leave aside the economic or financial niceties and let me tell you what's going on. Central bank is printing money, and it has to because the budget expenditures will increase. And the BRSA, the banking regulator, is making sure that money goes to loans, not to speculation or the currency markets, etc., etc. So far, so good, but it's not a foolproof system. Still, companies or individuals who borrow the money printed by the central bank can invest into foreign currencies or foreign currency denominated assets. If we look at Turkey's past, the expansion in money supply or high powered money or money base, I don't know which one they are using nowadays, has led to a depreciation of the currency. And I don't expect it to be any different this time. Moreover, BRSA forcing banks to make loans at gunpoint smacks of desperation. And it's certain to have a sentiment effect, both on Turkish depositors and on foreign financial investors. Foreign financial investors have been selling Turkish equities and government bonds since the beginning of the year. I really lost track of the numbers here, but I think they sold a total of over $7 billion of Turkish securities since the beginning of the year. Turkish savers, the real savvy ones, those who have been in the market, high net worth individuals, I think they're taking their money out of the banking system in fear of something going wrong. And the rookies are chasing the dollar, the momentum trade, because dollar is increasing rapidly in value. These new BRSA regulations I just mentioned have an unintended side effect. They will force banks to lower the interest rate on hard currency deposits without increasing those on Turkish lira deposits, which means making deposits or keeping your money in banks would become even less appealing to Turkish depositors. Now, you have to remember, according to central bank's own monthly survey, the CPI forecast for the end of the year is 9.70%. The current 1 month interest rate, annualized, is 9.75%. So if you put your money in TL and in a bank deposit, you get nothing. You essentially lend the money for free. This is why people keep dollar deposits. At least they benefit from the appreciation of the dollar against the Turkish currency. But now, by forcing banks to push off dollar deposits, BRSA is also closing this venue for Turkish savers to get value out of their investments, which would probably lead to a flight of deposits out of the banking system. And finally, you have to remember that Turkish banks and non-financial private sector borrows heavily from abroad. So they have to make disclosures in line with Basel III or IFR 9, whatever it's called, some kind of international accounting standards, when they want to borrow from abroad. And they have to show all of these changes as well as their bad loans to international banks. The BRSA regulations differ widely from international regulations. So Turkish banks are caught in this typical catch-22 situation. If they follow BRSA regulations, they run the risk of not meeting their international obligations as per the accounting standards. If they stick to international accounting conventions, they run the risk of being penalized millions of liras a month. I don't know what they're going to do. But all I know is that in a free market system, forcing banks or any other entity to do something rather than encouraging them is a bad idea. This is why I'm seriously afraid that this weekend would complicate Turkey's foreign currency shortage. To be more specific, I expect these new measures to have both a physical and a sentiment effect. Physically, more money printed by central bank. And I forgot to mention, in addition to asset purchases, that's buying government bonds and giving banks cash in return, they're also lending to banks liberally through the open market window, through repo transactions, which is, a conventional method. Fed does that too. But essentially, the money supply increases, and BRSA tries to funnel that money to loans rather than to financial assets. But we have seen it everywhere. ECB tried to do that. Bank of Japan tried to do that. Fed tried to do that. It just doesn't work. Most of the money printed goes to financial markets. In Turkey, there are only two financial markets. It's either going to go into the stock exchange, and the stock exchange has appreciated this week, or it's going to go into the currency market, and the Turkish lira will depreciate. The depreciation of the Turkish lira may not be a problem for people who live in developed countries, or for those countries where depreciation of the currency doesn't affect the economy so intimately. But as I've said, it's a completely different story in Turkey. Sentiment-wise, that's what I was telling you. It is possible that if lira depreciates further, people, even if they don't want to buy dollars or euros, would start following the trend. That is, they will convert their TL assets into dollars or euros. And corporations which have not hedged their upcoming foreign debt payments will rush to the spot market to buy dollars and euros in anticipation of their upcoming obligations. Or a company which needs to import raw materials or semi-finished goods within a month may become afraid that the cost of in dollars in Turkish liras would be much higher and may wish to store up dollars and euros in anticipation of currency depreciation. These are, in other words, to use the economic expression, self-fulfilling expectations. If you can't hold the line on currency depreciation, if people don't trust the central bank's ability or the ability of the monetary authority to control the exchange rate when there is a panic attack or speculative attack on the currency, they panic too. Even if they don't need it, they start buying foreign currencies and they run away from the Turkish lira. This is what I mean by a currency shock. It may not happen. I mean, Mr. Erdogan may change his mind. He may declare that he's ready to a standby agreement with IMF, or at least he may be persuaded to strike swap agreements with IMF or Fed, if these are still possibilities, which would not avert the danger, but it would postpone it. Or he may initiate some measures such as reforms that would increase the confidence of domestic and foreign financial investors in Turkey, bring in much needed foreign capital that would replenish our foreign currency reserves. If he doesn't do any of those things, the currency is very likely to lose value. We had a similar confidence shock in the summer of 2018 when United States demanded expatriation of an imprisoned American pastor, Mr. Andrew Brunson, who was being held on terror charges. Erdogan said, "Not while I'm alive." I think in a week, Turkish lira lost something like 20-25%. And 6 days later, Mr. Andrew Brunson was praying in White House with Mr. Trump. I'm not giving you this example to criticize Mr. Erdogan. In fact, he acted in a very pragmatic manner and did the best for his nation. I hope he does the same thing this time, or he's persuaded by his advisors that the light at the end of the tunnel is that of a coming locomotive. There's another option, of course, which I am really reluctant to mention, but it needs to be mentioned. It's an ugly word for us mainstream economists. It's called capital controls, which means, companies will be able to use foreign currency for trade as they wish. There will be no restrictions on that. But financial transaction by Turks, not foreigners, I don't think they'll go that far, but financial transactions by Turks will be subject to some kind of limitations. Examples happened during European debt crises in Greek Cyprus and Greece. You can look it up from Wikipedia, but essentially you tell people, look, you're limited to one withdrawal per week up to say, I am giving that as an example, $5,000, or you can't send money abroad unless you have someone to support abroad. Or, months we're freezing your FX deposits, you will have them back, but this is a national emergency, and you have to pitch in, you have to contribute your share. These are the possibilities, and none of which is pleasant. Even if in a capital control scenario, foreign investors are excluded, experience has shown us that they become frightened and take their money out of Turkey, whether that money is what they have invested in equities, bond, or swap markets, or whether it is their willingness to lend to Turkey. So it doesn't look very appealing for those who wish to do business for Turkey, but let me remind you, this is not something that will happen on Monday. Mr. Erdogan and the Turkish administration has about 2 weeks or so to come up with measures to prevent such a currency shock. I shall update you, and hopefully I shall prove myself wrong. I want to thank you, all 101 of you, to spare time from your busy Sunday to watch me. And I hope we can stay together and hope we can stay alive. I don't have a choice. I'm stuck at my home. I'm going nowhere, and I shall be broadcasting as long as I'm alive. Stay home, stay alive, and have a happy Sunday. Bye bye now. This is Atilla Yeşilada checking out from Istanbul.